Melanie Stone. I'm an ELA coordinator at the San Diego County Office of Ed. I am a coordinator for Project Arise, which is a professional development grant up and down the state of California, promoting effective literacy instruction for all students. We are very lucky today to let me move my slides forward to join you all in this work of empowering educators to elevate inclusive and effective literacy instruction for every learner. So all our learners in California become proficient readers. We have several partners in this work. We have 3 county offices. Beyond San Diego, we have Glenn County as well as Contra Costa. We also, one of the partners is here today, Marga, with the University of Laverne. So there's a lot of work here and collaboration ensuring that teachers have what they need to um, teach effectively with confidence that what they're doing in the classroom will progress their learners. What we would like to share with you before we get started is just a bit of information. The first is we at Project Arise have several online self-paced courses about things like executive functions and literacy. We have literacy as equity, foundational skills, comprehension and knowledge building, as well as intensive intervention. And what you can do is when you access the link that will be sent to you, you can sign up to participate in these asynchronous modules. And if you're interested, you can also earn units too, as well. So it's kind of a twofer. You get your units and you get your knowledge building as well. You will also receive additional opportunities to participate in community of practice sessions that are all Zoom and all accessible and all free to build your knowledge base and your confidence in teaching literacy for your students. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to our friend Marga, who's here to talk to us about her vast and deep knowledge in effective literacy instruction. Thank you so much, Marga, for being here today. Oh, you're on mute. I know.
Dang it. I'll just sit here and talk to myself for the next hour and a half. Okay, let's try that again. Talking about executive functions, the first thing you need to do is check and make sure you're not muted. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining, and thank you for especially my former students that are here from the dyslexia program and other people from IDA. It's really exciting to see this group. If you can, I'd love for you to have your cameras on if that's possible. It makes it more engaging and gives us an opportunity to build community. If you're in a place where you can't do that, I understand that as well. So we're going to get started here. Let me make sure. And for those of you that have had me before, you know we're going to start with our pace. So I'll get there in a minute. Today we'll be talking about executive functions. What are some of the key executive functions? How do they relate to reading? And what does it look like for children with dyslexia? And I'm from the University of Laverne. I have been an educator for a long, long time, but even more than that, I've been a reader for even a longer time. So there's life proof that I'm a lifelong reader there. I started studying the neurosciences maybe 15, 20 years ago. And unfortunately, there was like no discussion of any of this in my teacher preparation program, nor in my reading master's program, nor in my doctoral program. It all has been post-doctoral, which lets you know how long I've been around. But I've been fortunate to have done a lot of great work in the field, and as a result, have built the Dyslexia Teacher Training Program, which is an Orton Gillingham-based program to support literacy. And shameless advertising here. When you get the slides, you can click the link on the little image here if you want to find out more information. Okay, so as we're getting started, please think about one of these prompts to respond to. So overall, what do you think about your own executive functions? Like for me, they're far less strong than they used to be. Um, Maybe talk about your interest in the topic, talk about the grades of kids you work with and how this might be important, or if there's something else that would be good for me to know. So just kind of take a moment and pop a response to one of those in the chat, just so I know who I'm talking to. Mm. Yeah, Brandy, I think that really gives your Montessori students a good opportunity to build executive functions because they have all those choices. But I'd be curious to know, what about the kids that don't? Do they tend to be scattered or do they get direction? Okay, well, while you're thinking about that, first, I just, little warning, this is about a 3 hour presentation that I'm going to obviously not get to everything. So some of the slides I'll be skipping through, some of the slides we won't get to, but I left them in here because that way when you get the slides, you'll be able to read through them yourselves. And there's also some videos and things I've linked here that we're not going to watch today, but they're so important, I wanted you to have access to them. So that's just a little heads up here. Alrighty, so we're going to start with pace. People that know me, this is familiar. And we're going to begin with water because we are about 75% water. And when we don't have enough water, when our brains don't have enough, they tend to, like a wilted plant, sag and nothing works as well. So whatever liquid you have, we're in California, most of you have something by you, right? Take a drink if you have it. If not, imagine yourself drinking water. Then we're going to just kind of touch in and get centered. So you've had a long day, whatever it took for you to get here on your computer, ready to do this training. Let's just kind of rub over our heart, get centered, other hand on our navel. Take a breath, slow down. You made it. Thank you for joining. And let's just be compassionate with ourselves and let ourselves be present. Go ahead and switch hands, rub the other side, and thank yourself for coming too. Yeah. How many of you took a kind of a deep breath, sense of relief? Thank you, Ursula. Yeah, me too. All right, then we're going to do a little movement. And cross crawl is what we do when we walk. It's called bilateral, and it's basically engaging both sides of the brain. So if you remember from your early brain studies, the left hemisphere controls the right side of the brain, the right hemisphere controls the left. So when I move both my right hand and my left knee, this is a whole brain activity. So I'm gonna put on some music in a minute, and you're gonna be just join me in some cross crawl kinds of things. You can do it sitting down, better standing up. You can also just cross over your body. Make sure you're doing alternate. Don't do same side stuff. We want cross crawl. You can touch an ankle. You can touch an ankle behind you. So we're going to just do a little movement. Everybody good with a few things to do? Okay, I'm going to start the video here and we will move with Sly and the Family Stone. Sometimes I'm centering move, one arm out, thumb down, other arm out on top, palm to palm, clasp hands, and fold in. Cross one leg over the other. Now, if that's too difficult or uncomfortable, you can also just cross your arms over your shoulders, whatever's easiest. 3 deep breaths. And then we're going to unfold. 3 more deep breaths. And when you're ready, you can join me back at your computer. So thank you for those of you that participated. My intention with that is that gives you four different things you can teach your students, and then they can use to help self-regulate. When we are dysregulated, we can't learn. I think we all are aware of that. And this is simple, and you can do it anytime, anywhere, which it was designed for. This was actually built from Brain Gym, which is really sort of the early mindfulness movement from the 80s. So remember, we've got water, we've got just centering, we've got a little movement, we've got bringing it all in. And any one of those independently could help a kid when they're struck, when they're stuck, when they're out of balance, right? How many of you have your own personal practices for getting yourself regulated when you feel like you're not quite able to focus? Good. Terrell, what's one you do? Did I say this was going to be interactional? I'm assuming you all want to participate.
It's okay. Um, I have to stop and breathe, and it's something I do with my
Mhm.
class. We have a couple of different ways, and I do it myself. It was something I started in the classroom and then adopted it personally. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's just and that crisscross one that we call
Mhm.
it pretzel,
Uh-huh.
and I do that for me. Uh,
Good.
Sometimes I just have to stop and turn off and sit. That's my other.
Good for you. And the thing is with our kids is sometimes they don't notice that's what they need. And we just need to help them identify, okay, it looks like you're dysregulated, looks like you're uncomfortable, looks like you're stressed. What could you do right now to just take a break from that? My companion calls it disrupting the pattern. Sometimes pattern disruption is all you need. You know, you just get the awareness, you do your crisscross, your hookup. Of course, you probably don't want to use that with teenagers. Pretzel is a better idea. Okay. All right. Thanks, Trisha. Will do. All right. So I'm going to move on and I'll probably refer back to this. Okay. So first, I'm just going to talk about key executive functions in the beginning, their development, the relationship with reading, and how does executive dysfunction impact literacy and academic development. And then we're going to talk about some strategies. And like I said, because we're not going to get to it all, you'll have the slides and you'll be able to look through some of that stuff yourself coming down the line. All right. First, I just want to promote this book, Understanding Learning Disabilities, um, Inconvenient Brains. It's 120 pages. Each chapter sort of targets a different learning issue. There's a chapter on autism, one on executive function. Then I got a fair amount of information from this PowerPoint. Another chapter on motor coordinations and writing issues. One on language impairments, ADHD. Excellent, excellent book. Highly recommended. Okay, so Martha Denkla defines executive functions as a group of dynamic processes that depend upon connections among brain regions that, with experience, activate together. And these connections and activations shift in relationship to the different tasks and context. Okay, other definitions. EF is a set of mental processes that help us connect experience with action, and we use it to perform activities like planning, organizing, strategizing, paying attention, managing details, time and space, and is connected to working memory. And then finally, from Lynn Meltzer, who's done a lot of work on executive functions in the classroom, she says that it's complex cognitive processes that control flexible, goal-directed behavior and the coordination of numerous sub-processes. And this is important, that goal-directed behavior. If kids don't know what the goal is, how are they going to know what behaviors to choose? So helping kids identify the goal, what is our intent with this particular assignment activity that can really help them then choose, well, what do I need to do to attain that goal? There's lots of options today. How many of you find that your executive functions are much more disrupted because of all the interrupters we have? I know I used to be able to sit and focus at the library for like 6 hours doing chemistry or physics because they were so hard. No way. I don't even have that capability today. And I would have to stop and check emails and texts, probably just to break up the monotony too. But if I know what my goal is, I want to get this done at this time, then I can make choices about what activities to engage in or to ignore. So I think that's a really important point there. So useful metaphor that people rely on to talk about executive functions, that it's like the air traffic control system, being able to monitor arrivals and departures of planes. And the better our control system is, the less opportunity for things to go crashing into each other. Okay, so there's three key dimensions of executive functions: working memory, inhibitory control, and cognitive and mental flexibility. So we're going to take a look at each one of those. Working memory is about maintaining a task or idea in mind while adding relevant or deleting irrelevant information. That's an important one. Temporary retention of information that no longer exists. For example, when you go to log into your Word account or your email account or Google, they'll text you like a 6-digit number that you have to put in. How many of you are pretty good about remembering that 6-digit number? You look once, you enter it, done. That's working memory. 2 minutes later, it's gone, right? Back in the day, we used to use examples like remembering a telephone number you just looked up in the phone book, but who does that anymore, right? And finally, of course, excess load negatively affects performance. So sometimes when we have too many things we're trying to remember at one time, we have a hard time doing it. So other examples, executing multi-step tasks, keeping your place in the middle of a math problem, language on demand, ability to recall words and ideas efficiently, like that rapid automatized naming, and I'll get back to that later, and keeping in mind all the pieces we have to keep in mind when we're doing a writing assignment. So there's lots of places that working memory comes into play in schools. And sometimes our kids that struggle with that struggle. They're not able to follow those multi-step tasks, especially. Okay, so it's critical for reasoning, holding ideas and information in our mind and seeing how they relate. It's important for creativity, seeing connections between seemingly unconnected things, being able to assemble and disassemble and recombine elements. That's not my forte. My companion is brilliant with that, and he's so good. I have a problem. I go to him and, hey, Buchanan, help me with this. And he's so good about seeing things that don't necessarily seem connected and putting them together. Okay, so the next one is inhibitory control. And this is probably the one we see or have the most difficulty with all of the distractors that are available to us now. It's being able to have sustained attention, inhibit responses, cognitive inhibition, so thoughts and things that fly through our brain and get us distracted and off track. And it actually starts developing around 9 months. So examples include if we can't, kids that can stop playing and follow an adult's direction, avoid blurting out or interrupting, being able to raise your hand before speaking, waiting your turn, and delaying gratification. So in this video, how many of you have seen the video of the marshmallow test? It's so cute, right? It's children, they're like 3, 4 years old, and the researcher comes in and says, here's a marshmallow. I'm going to leave you in the room for a few minutes. If you don't eat the marshmallow, when I come back, you get a second marshmallow. And so you see these kids are sniffing it. They're trying to like avoid eating it. All the things they try to do to not eat the marshmallow so they can get a second one. But you can see they're really trying because they had already some executive functions in play. We're not going to watch it now, but I'll leave it for you to watch another time. Okay, so inhibitory control. We have three types. There's the motor behavioral control, like resisting temptation to eat the marshmallow, the think before you act, attentional and cognitive. So despite distractions and even when material is boring, we're able to concentrate, pay attention, and stay focused. And of course, emotional, being able to persevere. How many of you have heard of Angela Duckworth? She's done a lot of work on grit, right? And the research has said that students that are able to persevere, that stay focused, that work hard, that accounts for twice as much variation in final grades as IQ. In other words, really what they should be doing when we're talking about high school, why would we accept someone to college, is looking at high school GPA. That carries more weight than the SAT scores or the ACT scores. Kids that are naturally smart don't necessarily or didn't necessarily learn how to persevere, how to work hard. Sometimes actually kids that are gay struggle with working hard because they never had to. And when they finally do, they don't have the skills for it. So that sense of grit resisting temptation to quit despite boredom, initial failure, setbacks, and difficulties, and more fun things calling is a really important one. Okay, so Adele Diamond, who's also done a lot of work in executive functions, has another example here of a younger child even building a series of blocks despite all kinds of distractions. And it's really a good demonstration of that perseverance despite. So again, we're not going to watch this, but this cute little child, like in the middle of a room, in the middle of everything, just stays focused on building his thing with blocks. Okay, so working memory and inhibitory control. Each independently predicts math and reading competence from the earliest grades through university, often better than IQ. EFs need to be continually challenged in order to grow. And Adele Diamond talks about the value of storytelling, which unfortunately is a lost art. But giving kids opportunities to listen to stories and build the text in their head also is important for working memory and focus. And she says it even better than picture books because picture books have images and things that do some of the work for our kids. So I'm not saying reading out loud to kids isn't a great thing. Of course it is. But just going to put a word out for storytelling. All right. So cognitive flexibility, our third key component of executive functions, is the ability to shift attention from one activity to another, going back and forth between tasks, which, as you can imagine, also requires strong working memory skills. It's the ability to see the familiar in new ways. It gives us the flexibility to respond to new situations or opportunities or situations that sort of come up on the fly that were unexpected, right? So coming up with a plan B when plan A doesn't work, dealing with changes in routine, being able to argue both sides of a controversial issue. And not surprisingly, babies are able to problem solve and reason even before they speak. And even more importantly, babies that are exposed to two or more languages have better EF skills at 7 months than their monolingual counterparts. And that's even before speech development. And the theory here is that executive function skills like cognitive flexibility are stronger in emergent bilingual students because of the requirement to switch back and forth between two language systems. So there's another example, an argument in favor of bilingual education. All right, how many of you are familiar if have heard of hot and cool executive functions? Okay, so cool executive functions typically are measured in an emotionally cool environment. In other words, like right now, I'd say most of us are an emotionally cool environment. Nothing really going on. You're not really head up about anything. You're not panicked or stressed. You're not emotionally charged. You're just here in this presentation versus a hot environment where there's an emotional charge and you have to make a decision a little more quickly. So cool skills include planning, cognitive flexibility, working memory and inhibition. And then hot skills, social, emotional, motivational, effortful control processes. So when you are in an emotionally charged situation, what are your EF abilities, right? Sometimes our kids may be able to plan and be focused when they're in a cool situation, but once their emotions get charged, that's really when they need these self-regulation skills to be able to make decisions or even to recognize, you know what, right now I'm not going to make a decision. How many of you are aware of times where you've not made decisions because you're like, you know what, right now, not a good time to make a choice. Let me sleep on it. I'll decide tomorrow. Another hot executive function skill is that social understanding, which used to be called theory of mind, being able to imagine what somebody else might be thinking, which is important not only for reading literature and understanding story and character, but also when you're relating with people. What might they be thinking and what would my decision impact them? Okay, so EFs are core skills. They're not related to any specific module or ability. They're not limited to application of any one aspect of cognition, language, visual, spatial skills, or interpersonal or social abilities. As we saw in those early definitions, they're a group of dynamic processes that depend on connections between multiple brain regions that need to activate together. So that connection and activation needs to shift dynamically depending on the task and the context. And of course, it's a lifelong process, right? Children start developing EF skills as we saw at around 7 months, or at least we have evidence that they have some EF skills developed. But as you see here, the green shows immature brain and the blue shows mature brain. So even at 20 years, we still have some green parts of our brain not fully formed. The theory, it used to be they said your brain wasn't really fully mature until you're 25. Now they're saying between 25 and 30. So when you think about giving our 16-year-olds like a driver's license and control over a big vehicle, and you look at the amount of green in the brain that's not really mature or developed yet, I just think, holy cow, really? Do we want our 16-year-olds to be driving cars? So I always tell my students too, hey, if you're below 25, you can always say, not my fault. EF skills are not fully formed, but wait till I'm 30, then I'll be really there. But it is something to think about. And then our kids with ADHD. So Shaw, Sharp, and Rappaport said that ADHD is characterized by delay rather than deviance in cortical maturation. So their cortex isn't deviant, isn't problematic. It just is slower to develop. And there's always the last in, first out hypothesis, which says that kids with ADHD might be the latest to develop executive function skills fully and the first to lose them as they age, which really seems unfair, doesn't it? Obviously, we know things that we can do to support brain function as we age, like, by the way, dancing. Cross crawl moves and dancing is a really good cross crawl move. You've got the music, you've got the motion. My understanding is that dementia and Alzheimer's can be delayed up to 75% for people that dance in their older years. So if you're not dancing, get out and start dancing. I liked all of these images demonstrating what EFs could look like. So my favorite, though, is the spiral one here, because we all probably have experienced that when you're learning some new skill. Like if you think about learning how to type, who remembers learning how to type? Seventh grade typing class with a manual typewriter. And I remember practicing A, S, D, F, J, K, L, semicolon, A, and like over and over, right? You're memorizing the key, which finger goes on which key, and then you go to the next line. Like from F, you go to R or T. From D, you go to E. From S, you go to W. So I'm aware that there was that entry level early learning, and then I became more fluent and I'm typing better and I'm typing better. It moved up to the novice level, it cycled to the intermediate. So these skills keep going around and around as we get more proficient. Now I don't think I'll get any more proficient at typing. I'm about as fast as I'm probably ever going to get, which is fine. It's good enough. Also, I like this glacial pace. Notice that there's not like a linear growth. You start learning something and then boom, it just continues to grow. You might grow a little bit and then it slows down, and then it grows a little bit more and then it slows down, grows a little bit more, and then there's some steady growth and then it slows down. So it's a little bit of that one step forward, two step back thing. And I think that's important to recognize as we work with children, that it's developmental and sometimes there are pauses in their development of executive functions. I'm not going to read through this, but I'd like you to have access to it that shows what can we expect in terms of executive functions starting in children, babies, 7 to 9 months versus adults. And where are where are the children you're looking at and where might they be on the range? So I thought this was a helpful reference to include. Look at me zipping through stuff. So proud. This slide I really like too, because it talks about what each one of these smaller pieces of executive skills looks like. For example, task initiation. How many of you see kids or even yourself recognize that task initiation is if you're going to do something that's difficult or seems daunting, it's hard to get started. How many of you have experienced that? Writing that research paper, building that PowerPoint from scratch. I remember building this PowerPoint and just like it was so overwhelming. There's so much stuff. Figuring out where to get started was difficult. So that's an important one to help our kids through. How do we support our students in being able to get started on something that seems daunting? Response inhibition, I think, is another important one. How do we pause and not react or respond to things that pull our attention away? Being able to stay focused is absolutely goes right along with that response inhibition. How do we stay focused on something that's maybe not our most fun thing when there's like a gazillion other things we'd rather be doing, right? So I think these are all supportive and, understanding what each one of these are so you can help your kids. Okay, this for me is maybe one of my favorite slides in the presentation. And this comes from Adele Diamond. And there was a study of 1,000 children, you see the arrow down here, born in the same city in the same year, followed for 32 years with a 96 retention rate. And what they found is that children with better executive function skills as children had better creativity and cognitive flexibility, better self-control, especially that inhibitory control where they had better selective attention, being able to focus on the attention that they need to get the job done, had more discipline and perseverance, and stronger working memory, which influences academic achievement in all subject areas. So as I mentioned before, discipline accounts for twice as much variation in grades as IQ. Children with less inhibitory control, so the other side of the coin, children who were less persistent, more impulsive, and had poor attention, as adults 30 years later, had worse health, earned less money, and committed more crimes. And that's controlling for IQ, social class, home lives, family environment, the works. So executive function are huge lifelong skills. And even a little bit of a 5% change in any one of these can have serious life trajectory supports for kids. So it's not a little thing, it's huge. This is a huge thing. And as you see here, executive functions are important for every aspect of our lives. You can see some of the things here in terms of mental health. EFs are important for addictions, ADHD, conduct disorder, depression, OCS, OCD, schizophrenia. Physical health. Poor EFs are associated with obesity, overeating, substance abuse, and poor treatment adherence. Overall quality of life. People with better EFs have a better quality of life. School success, job success, marital success, public safety. So there's every reason to support development and growth of executive function skills. Okay, so this is a little 4-minute video. If you're introducing this to your colleagues or your friends, your teachers, this would give you like a good overview of what are executive functions. And again, we're not going to get into it now. All right, and so neurophysiology, as I've talked about, executive functions are networks that need to be overlapping and are built over time. There's no linear progression, as we saw that one chart. It's like a sort of one step up, two steps back kind of thing. And although it's associated with the prefrontal cortex, it engages networks from all parts of the brain. So how are these networks developed? When we are born, remember, babies have developed EFs early on, but our brains are immature and the networks tend to be local or connected within short distances. Neighboring connected neurons gradually become more remotely connected over a developmental process that takes time and is dependent on activation through usage and myelination. Are you all familiar with what myelination is? Okay, so we myelinate when we practice something. So back to my typing example. How many of you are like quick typers? You don't have to look at the keyboard if you think the word the. If you think the word the, your fingers know where to go, right? How many of you know if you're typing a longer word like cerebrospinal, you have to stop and think about spelling that out and type more slowly than if you're typing A and D, right? I see Ursula spelling it. Good job. Okay. So myelination is when we practice something over and over again, and the nerves, the neurons that need to wire together to do that particular thing become connected. So if my brain tells my finger to type the T, I've done it so many times that's super myelinated. They call that the neuronal network that's formed with that the superhighway. And what happens is the motor neuron. So I have a thought. I want to move my finger to type the T. All the neurons that it takes to make my finger move have done it so many times The neural cells become wrapped in what's called a myelin sheath, which are the glia cells in the brain. It's the white matter. And it becomes so automatic, I don't even have to really think about it much. How many of you know are aware of automatic processes like driving? I'm guessing all of you have automatic processes when you drive. You don't have to think much about it. You've done it so much now, it's automatic. Those are myelinated procedures. You've practiced it a lot. The challenge, of course, is when something is myelinated, but you don't want it there anymore. How many of you tried to break a habit, a pattern you're used to doing all the time, and now you have to do something different? It's really hard to break that, right? Because it's so well myelinated, you have to like stop, think, not do it. So we have to be careful about what we myelinate because habits and patterns are really hard to break once they become automatized. Okay, so the problem with mapping executive functions, it's difficult because there's attention networks, working memory, decision making, emotional pathways, and there's so many of them that there's almost no way if you put somebody in a scanner to map where and when that comes from. All right, this is the next most important slide. If you're taking screenshots, this is the one you want to take a screenshot of. Executive function in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the seat of reason. It's also called the neocortex, which is the newest part of the mammalian brain, right? Reptiles don't have a prefrontal cortex. Mammals do. So the PFC is the most vulnerable when we're sad, when we're stressed, when we're lonely, when we are sleep deprived. How many of you have made decisions when you're exhausted and realize the next day, what was I thinking? That was really stupid. And seeing some hands up, right? When we're not physically fit, when we're malnourished, when we're hungry. My friend Tara was a competitive gymnast as a kid. You know, those kids, they starve yourself and you're, um, what's the word? Malnourished. She actually stunted her growth. She should have been 5'5". She's only 5'2". So how much did that impact her executive function, her ability to think and do well in school and function because she was overly exhausted? They were gym after school, they were gym for another 3 hours and then all day on Saturday, and they were starving themselves. So when our kids aren't nourished and when they're exhausted, which is sort of common these days, they're not going to be doing as well. So again, Adele Diamond, PFCs and executive functions are the first to suffer and suffer the most in situations that are challenging when we need them the most. So that's why we need to teach kids to identify when they're dysregulated and teach them some strategies to get back on track, including not making decisions or not reacting until they know they're in a better space. Hugely important. I think most of us have probably learned that most of the time, but our kids don't. So here's the research that says, Adele Diamond says, I hypothesize programs that most successfully improve children's EFs are those that require and challenge EFs and support them indirectly by reducing stress, improving ability to handle stress, increasing joy, helping they feel they belong, and that others are there for them, and improving physical fitness. So when we're cutting, recess and things from school and kids don't get access to regular PE, that's really a problem. I was digging around for some articles and I found this one about supporting kids with executive function issues and ADHD. And what they said is chronic sessions of exercise, which means regular ongoing interventions with moderate intensity, should be incorporated to support kids with ADHD and their executive function growth. So when your schools are arguing for cutting out recess periods or cutting out PE, here's some evidence that we really need it for all kids, but especially, I mean, the ones that need it the most. Okay, so Martha Dunkla claims that there's no such thing really as executive dysfunction. I mean, there's not an executive function disorder. It's more like executive dysfunctions. In other words, we can change that. It's not like a kid with dyslexia whose brain literally is wired differently. Kids with executive dysfunctions can be taught to have executive functions. It's a cognitive control processing issue and a huge source of underachievement in school. Anxiety can impair EF. Either on its own or in conjunction with other neurological or neurodevelopmental conditions, which can lead to executive dysfunction. And for example, a child with dyslexia, anxiety can cause levels of inattentiveness that make it look like it's ADHD. It may not be, it may just be that child's anxiety over their struggles with dyslexia. Okay, so in sum, then, ES skills do not develop automatically and take effort to mature and improve. They can grow and evolve. They need to be progressively challenged as children mature. Repeated practice is key. EF skills lay the foundation not only for academic achievement, but also for general well-being and lifelong outcomes. They are critical for school, job, relationship success, and mental and physical health. Finally, they travel circuits, similar circuits as emotional networks. Therefore, they are negatively impacted by stress. Okay, questions or comments? Oh, one final word about multitasking. You've probably heard that there is no such thing as multitasking. That's a myth. What happens instead is it's extended working memory capacity. So some kids have the ability, and some adults too. You can have three screens open. You can be doing one thing here, one thing here. But it's not that you're keeping all those things in the forefront. I'm here presenting to you, but if I clicked over into my email, up says I have a new email there in my inbox. If I clicked over that, I'd have to stop and read that. Then I'd have to come back to you and kind of pick up the working memory pieces that were going on to do this presentation, right? How many of you are have a fairly difficult time with that, switching from one task to another and then going back? Now, some of our kids are pretty good at it, but typically it takes longer to do a task if you're doing two or three things at a time. On the other hand, if I'm grading a set of 18 lesson plans, that's really onerous. That's really hard for me. So sometimes I'll just give myself, okay, I'm going to grade three. Then I'm going to pause and toggle to something else, take a little break, do that thing, then come back and grade three more. That actually works pretty well. And it doesn't require a lot of picking back up that working memory unless I do it in the middle. If I'm grading someone's project and I stop in the middle and go out and come back, then I have to pick up where I was in the project. But if I finish the grade, that might work for me. So there are arguments for doing it that way because it's how you can get through it, right? And I used to overeat a lot, which is not really the best strategy to eat your way through grading. How many of you like put on pounds at the end of the semester when you're sitting there grading a bunch of stuff? Okay, so not the ideal. So toggling is a better way to do it. All right, so I'd like to just take a moment and think about key takeaways. You can either unmute and state it or pop it in the chat. What are some difficulties you're seeing with your kids? What strengths are you seeing? Are kids taught to build or strengthen their EFs in your schools or programs? Do you see them struggling? Is it affecting their academic success? And I don't think we're going to get into breakout rooms, so let's just take a moment and share
I walk in and I go,
in regards to literacy. All right, like working memory and self-control are the foundation for literacy development, influencing a student's ability to focus, understand complex texts, and manage the demands of reading. Sorry, Stacy, I just saw your hand up there. Do you have a question?
Yeah, sorry. I'm just getting settled. I was in the car driving. But now I can actually turn this on. Um,
Okay.
Something you said, this is like a little bit further back.
Hmm.
You had mentioned, I think it was it, I can't remember who you referred to, but was talking about that there isn't necessarily uh when you were talking about disorder,
Yeah,
that
it's not executive, yeah, it's just dysfunctions.
yeah. So my question is, do you what I try to explain to families that I work with is that I really, that's my soapbox. I don't love the name ADHD, the
Hmm.
pathologizing and the disorder piece.
Hmm.
And I'm much more inclined to, are you familiar with Hallowell's VAST?
Hmm.
So he proposes something to kind of describe the same experience, but it's VAST stands for Variable Attention Stimulus Trait. And I feel
Nice.
like that's such a better,
It
the
is. It
better
is.
name for it. And I think it feel like not just the name is less offensive, but it also feels like a more true descriptor. And
Hmm.
I would love to lobby for that to be in the DSM instead of ADHD, but I don't think that will happen in my lifetime.
But a good point. And reframing it, absolutely.
Hmm. Thank you.
Especially in this day and age, which I'll get to in a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about reading. Um, Stanislaw Dewan, who wrote Reading in the Brain. And if you want to learn about the reading process, this is one of the best books. The other next best book is Marianne Wolf's Proust and the Squid. I would read them both. I did read them both. But I just want to show you a little bit of
So how does
this.
that work? Well, this is a picture of your left hemisphere. The left hemisphere of the brain is most essential for language and reading. And just to orient you, this is the back of the brain, this is the front of the brain. It's been slightly inflated, so you can see inside the folds. And now I want to show you the activation of the brain as you read one word. We see it in time. So let me start this. Here we go. And you have the word unfolding from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. It will loop several times. You can see the information enters into the occipital pole, which is the visual side of the brain, moves into the ventral areas, and then explodes into the left hemisphere distributed activity.
Okay, so we can map what it looks
So
like
how
when
does that
children,
work?
when we read one word,
Well,
right? But you saw it's complex. Reading doesn't happen in one part of the brain. And I think you already know, right, that we're not born with the ability to learn to read. We're born with language. Probably 90-ish, 99%, 98% of all humans that are born are able to learn language. Is there anybody that knows a number? I probably should look that up. But most kids can learn language. Not every kid can build the networks to learn reading as easily as others. And dyslexia is one of those challenges where neurologically kids' brains are different and they don't build the networks in the same way their typically developing peers do. Now, there are kids that are born with some language difficulties, language learning difficulties, which also impacts their reading. But you see the networks required just to be able to read. So we have some centers here, like the occipital part of the brain, the back part of the brain, where we see the letters and the shapes of the letters. Then this red area here, the ventral occipitotemporal area, the visual word form area he calls, that's developed. We're not born with that. That's actually the same place where our brains go to for recognizing faces or for recognizing places. We create a new space when we learn to read that matches letters and shapes of letters. But that doesn't include the sound of letters. Then it has to go over to Wernicke's area here, where we identify sounds, and it has to, okay, this letter A says this sound. And then if we want to speak it, that comes over here to the frontal Broca's area. So we have these areas of the brain, and then they have to be networked together through practice, through explicit instruction. And if I sound like I'm really loud about this, this is like so essential because I think teachers don't understand that we have to build these neural networks. They don't come naturally to us. And about 20% of our kids need very explicit instruction in order for that to happen. So just for reading, these are the networks that have been mapped, at least 12 of them, just to be able to read. And you'll notice here that the first one, attention, is executive function. So if we don't have strong executive function skills, it's going to be even harder to build those neural networks for reading. All right, I know many of you have seen The Simple View of Reading, came out in the 80s, trying to explain reading is an equation between our ability to recognize and decode words times language comprehension. If either one of those is missing, remember your math, something times zero is zero. So we're not going to get comprehension if we don't have both of those. Then Scarborough came out with the rope and she said, yeah, word recognition, but look at all the things that it takes to be able to recognize words. And then language comprehension. Look at all the pieces it takes to get language comprehension. And then we had Kate Nation who said language is huge. If kids don't have strong language skills, they're going to struggle with reading. And I've been doing some work on just early language development. You know that a baby starts hearing the sounds of its mother's language in the last trimester in utero. So babies are born already identifying the sounds and the rhythms of the language their mother speaks, the mother tongue, right? Um, and she says that no oral language prowess, no matter how good they are with oral language, will bring about successful reading if they haven't learned the principles of how the writing system works. So this is probably something we all know, especially if we work with struggling readers. All right, so Lori Cutting came in with her work on executive functions. And she said, yeah, all that stuff is important, but if kids don't have executive functions, look how that's wrapped around the reading rope here. They need to be able to store ideas in working memory, update mental models of text, inhibit unnecessary information, have flexible recall of impertinent information, and be able to make inferences. That's all EF and required to be able to be good readers, sorry. Duke and Cartwright, this has been a little bit contested, but their active model of reading, what they said, they took the reading rope. So the reading rope, you have the word recognition processes here, language comprehension here. And they said there's some real overlap here. Self-regulation is really important. Self-regulation over on this side. Uh-oh. That's hyperlinked. So self-regulation includes motivation, engagement, and EF skills. They also said we have to overlap. Those bridging processes are important. And I really like what they talk about, the graphophonological semantic cognitive flexibility. Say that 3 times fast. Go ahead and impress all your friends tonight at your next cocktail party. Yeah, how's your graphophonological semantic cognitive flexibility? Basically, what that means, though, is being able to be flexible with letters and sounds. We all learn that A says ah, but A doesn't say ah when it's at the end of a word like Alaska. Or A says A when there's a silent E there, or AY. But there are 10 different ways to spell a long A sound. So that's that graphophonological semantic cognitive flexibility. And I practice that quite a little bit. Notice how it kind of comes trippingly off the tongue. And finally, of course, the theory of mind, being able to infer what other people might be thinking, especially characters in a book, is really important. So those are some of the additions they added based on the brain science that came about after the reading rope was developed. Makes sense, right? You can all see probably those processes and how important they are. All right, so let's look at the components of EFs and overlap them with reading skills. So looking at decoding, that cognitive flexibility piece that I mentioned, important for word reading because we have to shift between multiple sources of information, looking at the morphology of the word, the etymology of the word, the spelling of the word. Remember, English is morphophonemic. Our spelling is not just based on sounds, but it's also based on meaning and the history of the word. We have to call on working memory, allowing for storage and manipulations of the phonological, the sounds, and visual spatial, the letters on the page. This is a key factor contributing to language acquisition and processing and accounts for 3 to 13% variance in decoding. So kids' decoding skills vary not just on their ability to decode, but their cognitive flexibility and working memory. So oral language, obviously important for developmental vocabulary, listening comprehension, and morphological awareness based on cognitive flexibility and working memory. And of course, reading comprehension depends on cognitive flexibility, also on working memory, predicts 2 to 10% of variance in reading comprehension beyond vocab and decoding. So just that working memory can be hugely important for our kids. And as you know, some of our kids struggle with that. So I want to talk for a little bit about kids with specific reading comprehension difficulties. These are kids that are good decoders, but don't make sense of what they're reading. So they don't need Orton Gillingham. They don't need my dyslexia program. What they need is specific reading comprehension strategies to help them make sense of text. And if you're looking for a source for that, this book by Kelly Cartwright came out in 2023 is excellent. I'm kind of partway through it, and as you can see, I've tabbed lots of it already because she's got so much ideas about explicitly teaching kids that can already decode but aren't making sense of text. All right, so working memory and reading comprehension, I'm going to kind of skim through this because I want to get to some of the strategies. But I do want to take a moment to talk about writing. Writing is the most cognitively demanding task that we ask of our kids. It requires integration. So all the things you saw in the reading rope, it requires all that stuff, but we also have the spelling and the handwriting piece, that motor coordination. And by the way, Dunkla and her chapter on motor coordination in this book, it's excellent. I have it. Just getting the book for that chapter is important. And people that have had my dyslexia class, you already got to read that chapter. But it requires integration of hundreds of neural pathways related to language, memory, executive function, and is the most complex activity the human brain can undertake. And here are some of the EF skills that we have to employ during writing. I personally found writing to be the hardest thing, and I had a difficult time making writing work. So all these things have to happen in order to be able to write. The theory of mind here is being able to imagine what the reader is thinking as they're reading my paper, which is really difficult, right? So hard to get outside your own head and think how the reader is perceiving it. And I'm not going to get into why that would be, but if you want more information about writing, Tracy Tokuhama and colleagues' book is excellent. Writing, Thinking in the Brain came out in 2025, based in the neurosciences and how can we support writing instruction. Okay, we know there are differences between dyslexic and typically developing brains. And in terms of EFs, what they found with kids with specific reading comprehension issues had less reduced gray matter in the prefrontal cortex area, which is our executive function region, compared to kids that are typically developing and kids with dyslexia. So sometimes kids with dyslexia even have stronger EF skills, and we've seen that with those kids, right? Some of them that are really like good compensators. And sometimes those kids, we don't even know they have reading problems because they're so good at faking it, or like they have such good workarounds. Sometimes our gifted kids are those kids. So that's something to keep an eye out for too. All right, so just a quick EF and reading, some interconnections and interdependences, some things that are required in order to be able to read and make sense of text and write. And we've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to keep cooking here. I love this quote. To highlight these issues of development in the adolescent brain, a recent article in Parade compared the teenage brain to Ferrari. It's fast, shiny, sleek, handles well. Problem is, it has lousy brakes. So true, right? That's Richard Guare. He wrote Smart But Scattered Teens, the executive skills program for helping teens reach their potential. Book I'd recommend. So I'm just going to skip through this because we're going to go through this stuff. Okay, this slide I like. How do we know if it's an EF issue or if it's just a language developmental issue? So on the left here, kids with difficulty with oral languages might have difficulty with vocab and word pronunciation. Reading challenges would look like fluency or decoding or comprehension or slower reading rates, difficulty in written expression. That's different. Those are kids that have language developmental issues, as opposed to kids that have EF issues, difficulty with time management, chunking large assignments into smaller pieces, struggle with making and sticking to a plan, memory retention combined with poor note-taking skills, and most often is based in motivation due to the above. So some overlap here is where working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control come into play. All right, so I'm going to skip through this stuff because I want to get to. So you've probably seen dyscalculia is another issue, and dysgraphia. Executive functions also play into kids that have difficulties with math, difficulties conceptually with math, are also going to struggle with the steps it would take to do the math, and of course with writing and dysgraphia. I'll let you look at that on your own. I want to talk a little bit here about this bottom-up theory. So when we're supporting kids that have executive function challenges, bottom-up means helping them. It's strength-based, it's talent-focused, finding out what are the skills, what can they do, where are their strengths, and helping them develop executive function skills based on those strengths, giving them developmentally appropriate challenges so they can rise to it, scaffolding it, mentoring them, giving immediate and meaningful feedback, providing context, giving them an understanding of how does your brain work? How do you support your brain? What do you need to do? We find that the kids, like Trisha was here that works at a school for kids with dyslexia, teaching kids how their brains work. So when they go off into other schools or college, they can advocate for themselves. Hugely important. So motivation is so critical. It's critical to learning. If we don't care about something, we can't learn it. Mary Helen Imardino Yang here in this video talks about how essential it is. We see motivation going all the way down in their brainstem. And of course, good teachers have talked about this for years, right? We see our kids light up, and we know they light up when they're excited about something, but literally we cannot learn it if we don't care about it. So I urge you to watch this little 7-minute video. It's an introduction to some research studies she's overviewing there at AERA. And I think you'll all be able to make sense of it. It's very, very good. So we talked about bottom up, engaging kids with their own brains. Now let's look at top down. I've seen this with my kids when I taught 7th grade. You know, the reminder binder. Kids were supposed to fill out what the homework was. I was supposed to initial it. Then they'd go home and the parents would sign it. That's top down. It's not a bad strategy, but it's not always necessarily the best strategy. And it's maybe not one that the kids feel connected to or something that they're going to actually do in their lives. So we can help kids set up patterns and strategies and practice with them. But the ideal is finding one that they can work with that's going to be effective. So, you know, timing, like set a timer. Okay, for 8 minutes, I'm going to do this thing. Then 2 minutes, I'll take a break. 8 minutes, I'll do it. Whatever you need to do to get through it. But we want to support kids and then be able to build strategies that are going to actually work for them that they can start internalizing, right? So we want to be neurodiversity affirming, which means it's flexible, there's some autonomy, there's some mutual respect here, spaceful for special interests. So what do they love to do, and how can we build on that to build their EF skills? This book on motivational interviewing is excellent. I did a training with Sebastian Kaplan, and he's worked with some really, you know, kids that have been in really difficult life situations and have made really positive impacts on interviewing them about what decisions to make and how to make those decisions. And that includes teaching them how to evaluate decisions. Sometimes our kids just don't know. And something as simple as this grid. Okay, I've got option A. What are the advantages to option E? What are the disadvantages? Then there's plan B. What are the good things about plan B? What are the less good things about plan B? Walking kids through something like this so they can make informed decisions as they're considering what steps they want to take. Okay, so some things we can do to support working memory: sketch notes or flow notes, survey question, read, recite, review. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Storytelling or dramatic play, retrieval practice. So one of the best ways to learn is to retrieve, right? So if you've introduced something, giving kids opportunities to practice how they retrieve it. If they took notes, quizzing themselves on their notes. Questioning, asking questions. That's a big one that Kelly Cartwright talks about in her executive function and reading comprehension. Questioning is really valuable for supporting learning. Active reading, deep annotation practices, engaging with the text. Louise Rosenblatt talked about that too. Those low dopamine activities, cooking, artwork, things like that are fun. Can we weave that in? Movement and coordination, and a high protein diet. Okay, so top down to take the memory take the load off working memory, extended time, monotasking, so not being pulled in multiple directions. Structured writing, giving them templates, sentence frames for writing. SQ3R, I love. Survey, question, read, recite, review. If you Google it or go to YouTube, you can find multiple videos that talk about it, or email me, I'll send you a link for some that I like. Having kids preview the text, engage their background knowledge. What do they already know about it? Then take headings. Let's say this is informational task, and write a question out of the heading. Read that section, answer the question, review it when they're done. It's a really neat way to break down the text, scaffold their comprehension. Rather than having kids just read from beginning to end, they're engaged and actively learning with that text. All right. I just want to walk you through. Oh, by the way, this is a really cute video. A 4th grade teacher is modeling how do you give good instructions using having the kids tell her how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It is hysterical. They say, well, you know, just one of the papers says, well, take out your peanut butter and jelly and put it on. So she takes a little thing of peanut butter and like slaps it on her arm. She goes, I put it on. Is that what you meant? And they're like, no. So it was really cute. Like she's demoing reading their instructions and talking about how to make it more clear. Highly recommend this one. All right. So many good things. Let me get to our resources that I've linked for you here. There's something called Magic School, which is an AI program that helps kids break down tasks into smaller pieces. So if they have to write a research paper, they might type in, I have to write a research paper about blah, 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 and it's due in 6 weeks. What steps do I have to take? And it will help break that down. Pick your topic, find articles or books about the topic, write an outline, take notes. Kind of breaks it down. And you can even break each one of those steps into smaller steps. I also wanted to share my colleague, Monica Kaprowska, that took my class at the Harvard Mind Brain Education course, wrote this excellent paper about using ChatGPT in the writing process for young children. What are the pros? What are the cons? How does that impede EF development? Writing, as I said, is the most difficult. But what happens when our kids completely take It's hard, no question. I'm sure there are times that if I were working on a paper and I was struggling and I had stomach aches and all the works, if I could have just like popped it into ChatGPT and had it write for me, I might have done that. But I also learned to think and consider. So how can we use ChatGPT more intelligently and what are the implications? Highly recommended. This is a preprint. You can click on that link, it'll take you there. So here are some sources with good information about EF. There's the Magic School. I also found an article from a woman that talked about using Magic School for your English learners. Reading Rockets has some good stuff. This is the book I mentioned by Dawson Guare. The Center for Transformational Teaching and Learning has something called Global Teach. It's a EF program that you can access asynchronously, and kids can, pay a little bit for and use. Of course, Project Arise has a really good EF module that you can access for free, and understood.org. Oh, here is something, a video for SQ3R. So some information on SQ3R. I don't know if you're familiar with CuraPod, but that's an AF program that will build PowerPoints. This is for teachers. It's not great, it's good, but it can get you started on building lessons. SERP, I love this. They have math by example where they show partially worked math problems. So kids get, to take that working memory load off, kids get problems that are partially solved. And Coloring Colorado, you're probably familiar if anybody's done work with bilingual programs, but they have a good resource for using sketch notes to help kids take notes, like not in a traditional note-taking formula, but using images and pictures to help with note-taking. Here are some of the books I like. Anna, you asked about why are kids coming in with poor executive function? Anxious Generation really answers that question. It talks about because of our devices, because of social media, because our adults are on devices. I'm at the park, I see adults on their phone, texting, not engaging with their children. What kind of interactions are kids? We evolved to interact live and in person. So that's an important one. Stolen Focus is like the next book. What happens when we can't focus? We don't engage because we're always being interrupted. Then here's the Cartwright book. And this one was recommended to me from Engaging Minds. Did I include them? I did not. Engaging Minds is a company that does executive function tutoring. So if you're interested in them, reach out to me. But this is the book they recommended. I have not read it, but I know them and they're very good. So Late, Lost, and Unprepared, they recommend that one especially for parents. Whew, okay, we're a minute over, so I'm going to stop. I'll stay on for a minute if you have questions or comments. And thank you all for joining at the end of your long, busy day. Sorry, Melanie. Thanks, Tricia.
Thank you so much for being here today. Remember, we'll be sending you an email with all the resources, slides, and the recording link. So that's coming soon. I also want to share that Nicole put in the feedback survey. Please fill that out for us so we can continue to bring you very pertinent information to enhance your instructional practice. Like and share Project Arise on us, and You are welcome to stay on for questions. Thank you so much for joining us. I know some of you have had such a long day. We enjoyed spending some time with you today.